Welcome back to another episode of BreBre Talks MMA. It's been a week of no UFC. God help us all. We did have BKFC, which I only watched the Taylor Starling fight. Sorry. It's a tongue twister. Yeah, so I watched that, which was a good fight, and I think a lot of people were counting Taylor Starling out on that one. She ended up defeating Jenny Savage. She trains at Modern Warrior. That's Keith Richardson's gym. Keith Richardson is another very underrated bare knuckle boxer. So was glad to see that. And yeah, not a whole lot going on with UFC. Obviously, we've got Delice versus Imavov. See, that is Saturday, so that's in a couple days. And let's see, that's the main event. The co-main event is Moicano versus Dober, which I'm actually probably more excited for that fight. I think a lot of people are on the same page with that one. It just seems like that's the more exciting matchup. Could honestly be the main event, with it being a lightweight fight. And I think they're pretty close in the top 15, I believe. Moicano is ranked number 13 and Dober is number 15, maybe? Something like that. They're pretty close, but I don't know. I'm leaning towards Moicano in that matchup. Maybe like a submission, but who knows? I mean, Drew Dober has honestly surprised me so many times, but then it's kind of like a lack of consistency. Like, he'll go on a tear and then he'll just, Islam Makhachev, that's one loss that aged very well. So it's not like he's losing to scrubs, he's losing to top level competition, Frivola. So it is what it is, but I do really like Drew Dober. I like Moicano too, honestly. I like both of them. So I'm not sure who to root for in this situation. I'll probably root for Drew Dober just because, I've been a fan of Drew Dober a little bit longer, but yeah, I don't know. I have a feeling that Moicano is going to win this one, though, for some reason. I don't know why. But I'll be happy if either of them win, honestly. And for the main event, it's hard to say. I mean, I want to say Delice, but I don't know. I mean, Imavov is another one where his most recent loss has aged pretty freaking well. I mean, Sean Strickland went on to win the belt, so yeah. But trying to think, what else am I going to talk about? Yeah, there was no fights, obviously, no UFC. Still kind of buzz in the air from the pay-per-view, I feel like. Still a lot of debate going on, which surprises me, honestly. I didn't think people would still be talking about this. And I said I was not going to talk about the Sean Strickland fight anymore. But you know what? Here I am. I'm going to still talk about it because people have sparked some interesting conversation over this fight. And I posted a couple clips. And one of the clips was about the fight and talking about how, Sean Strickland utilized the jab. And if you watched my last episode, you will probably remember what I said. But yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Here's the thing, you guys. I think that there's a little confusion on how fights are scored. And it's an interesting debate, though. I do like the debate. I do like the argument. I will say that. I don't agree with the argument, but I like the argument. I like it. And I think a lot of the argument is either A, people are saying, okay, Sean Strickland's style is not entertaining. I get it. It's not that wasn't the most entertaining fight. Let's be honest. Okay. I don't think it was entertaining on either side, though. It just looked like Dracus was throwing more. It looked like that. It looked like he was like, But really, Sean Strickland was landing more in reality. I think we can all agree on that. And the stats don't lie, Well, sometimes the stats do lie. I will say that. Sometimes the stats do lie a little bit. But in this case, I think the stats were correct. I think Sean Strickland clearly outlanded Dracus in that fight. The argument, though, is that Sean Strickland did not mix it up enough. And that is a very interesting argument that I want to talk about, because do you have to mix it up? I get it. It's called mixed martial arts, right? Mixed martial arts. Okay. Do you have to mix it up to win the fight? No. You don't. You don't have to mix it up to win the fight. Did Sean Strickland mix it up in the Adesanya fight? Not really. Not a ton. I get it. He mixed it up more in that fight than he did in the Dracus fight. But still, he pretty much did the same thing. The only difference is that Sean was on the back foot more in the Dracus fight, whereas in the Izzy fight, he was doing more of the octagon control and pressuring. So I get that. So two completely different styles, two completely different fights, right? But the thing is that when you look back to the roots of mixed martial arts, and you look back to the roots, you could also argue, okay, well then should Royce Gracie have mixed it up more? When he was going in there and just choking the shit out of people? Should he have mixed it up more? No, because that was working for him. He had a game plan that worked. He was so much better at that one area that he didn't need to mix it up, And I think that for Sean, he has figured out one area of martial arts that he's very good at, so he focuses on that, right? And I think that's important. I think that to be well-rounded and to be a true mixed martial artist in every single fight is a little unrealistic unless you are in your prime and you are completely healthy and you don't have any injuries. I think then it's realistic. But Sean has had major injuries. Like I think people forget. He was in an accident. It had nothing to do with fighting, but he was in an accident. And, I think that might have a lot to do with it. He doesn't want to put additional stress on his body if he doesn't have to. So I think that a lot of the reason that Sean's style has become so much more refined is honestly more from a longevity standpoint. Because think about it. He doesn't use a ton of energy fighting this way. So he's able to go, for 5 rounds, easy 5 rounds. He could go probably for 10 rounds and do the same thing all night. Also, he doesn't have to focus as much on the grappling training. He just has to make sure his takedown defense in his get-ups are on point. So he doesn't have to, spend as much time training in those areas, which is very hard on the body. Look at Kamaru Usman. Look at what his knees are pretty much done. You look at a lot of fighters, and like Tony Ferguson is a perfect example of somebody whose body is really worn down, and he just had to get surgery, and I think that has a lot. Like people don't understand how limiting injuries can be in mixed martial arts, because there are so many facets of the game that you have to train, and in order to compete on an elite level and train in all of those areas equally is very difficult. If you want to be exceptional in all of those areas. And so people, have said, oh, well, Sean used to, grapple more. He used to mix it up more. Yeah, I think he's just fighting smarter. I think it may be out of necessity. It may be because he knows, okay, well, if I train, vigorously in wrestling and jiu-jitsu and striking and sparring and everything, I'm going to wear myself down. And I'm not going to be able to continue fighting as long as I would if I just fight like this. So he's developed more of a boxing style. And when you look at injuries, in boxing, there is more head trauma, but there are a lot less like ACL tears and injuries like that, and arguably those injuries have more of an impact on your MMA career sometimes than the head trauma does. Not in all cases, But I think that Sean has developed, honestly, a perfect style for longevity. I think he has, he's figured out a way to basically avoid getting hit, similar to how Mayweather fought. And he's also figured out a way to really not grapple that much, if at all, not throw a ton of kicks, which, those kind of can present present injuries as well, more so than boxing would. But yeah, I think that's where a lot of his style comes from. And I don't know any of this for sure. I haven't talked to him about it. I don't know Sean personally, but if I had to guess, I would think that it's from a longevity standpoint. The reason why he's not throwing a ton of kicks, the reason why he's not grappling as much, the reason why he's really just focusing on throwing jabs and throwing simple combinations, and in utilizing his defense. So I think that, yeah, he's developed a very smart way to fight, and he's made it all the way to a world title fighting this way. So while it may not be the most entertaining, and I get that, we've got to think about the health and the longevity of the fighters. And we also have to keep in mind that this is their livelihood. This is how they make a living. So he might also be thinking, okay, well, if I wear myself down and get all these injuries and then I have to take a 2-year layoff because I had an ACL tear or I had to get my knee replaced, like, he's thinking about these things and, maybe doesn't want to go through that and is thinking of, okay, well, then my income is going to be limited. And I know you see these fighters get to a world title and you see all the money they make when they get there, but they don't get all that money. First of all, they don't get all of it. Second of all, their careers are so short-lived that, they got to be really smart about it. And if they're not, if they put their career in jeopardy like that, they can really hurt themselves down the road financially. So you have to think about that. A lot of these athletes, they end up going broke later on. I got my camera. Okay. Oh, I just made it worse. Whoopsies. I hit my camera with my shoe. And, oops. Anyways, hopefully I don't do that again. But, otherwise I might have to buy a new camera. No. So that's my argument with Sean. I think that his style is very intentional in a lot of ways. Or maybe it's not. Maybe he just, I doubt it. I think he's being intentional with it. I think he is. So yeah, but the argument about you got to mix it up. There's no rule that says that. There's no rule. I mean, in the eyes of some judges may prefer that. But technically, the first criteria of scoring is damage. So it doesn't matter if you mix it up. It does not matter. There's no rule that says you have to. Look at somebody like Ryan Hall. Does he mix it up? No. No, he doesn't. But like I was saying, you go back to the roots of martial arts, and it was one style versus another style. Jiu-jitsu versus kickboxing, or boxing versus wrestling. Like, that was the root of the UFC. That's what it was founded on. So I think that, if anything, Sean is a true mixed martial artist because it's like the original mixed martial arts where it was like this style versus this style. And so that's my argument. I do see where people are coming from, though, especially from, fans that maybe don't appreciate boxing as much. And I think, you want to see knockouts, you want to see action, of course. But I think the more educated that you become on the sport and the more educated that you become in other areas of the sport, like boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, like, especially if you train, you pick up on things and you learn to appreciate that more. But I get it. You know, it wasn't the most entertaining fight. I get it. But I can appreciate, you know, what Sean did. Because I can appreciate solid defense. I can appreciate, you know, the little details. And I think that, yeah, that's the thing, is it's small details that are to be appreciated about it. And I think most people overlook those small details. And they kind of look at the bigger picture of like, okay, well, Drakus was putting the pressure on. He was wrestling. He was mixing it up. And that's great. You know, Drakus is very well rounded. But at the same time, does that mean just because you mix it up more, does that mean you won the fight? I don't know. I don't know if that is the case. But I digress. I said I wasn't going to talk about this fight anymore, and here I am. But I just had to bring that up because it was a very interesting debate that I wanted to dive into. But in other MMA news, let's see what we got going on. We had some more fights announced on UFC 300. I was hoping that by now we would have a main event. They keep getting teased about this main event announcement. I haven't seen anything. I'm going to check right now. I've been checking pretty frequently. It's kind of concerning at this point, how much I am checking. But I just, you know, I don't want to miss it. Yeah, they haven't announced anything new since I last checked. Okay, so we've got Sadiq Youssef versus Diego Lopez added to UFC 300, which that's a phenomenal fight. I'm very excited for that. Obviously, Diego Lopez is very fun to watch, so that will be, I mean, yeah, this is a great card. I don't know what people are complaining about. We also got Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm added to UFC 300. So this fight is very interesting. I think people see the age of Holly Holm and they're like, oh, this fight sucks, you know. But look at Holly Holm's resume. I mean, she got submitted by Bueno Silva. Okay, well, Bueno Silva just fought for a title. Again, it was like probably the worst title fight ever, but still fought for a title, you know. And so I think people are really discrediting Holly Holm. Holly Holm is the only boxing champion to ever compete in MMA, in the UFC. I don't know about MMA in general. That's probably... Well, Francis now is a boxing champion, but Holly Holm was a boxing champion first, and then... Well, no, Francis is not a champion. What am I talking about? If Francis becomes champion, that's what I'm thinking. I'm tired. If Francis becomes champion, then he would be, I guess, the first male, but he's not in the UFC anymore, so I don't know. I don't know if there's been another boxing champion in MMA. I don't know. As far as, like, on the top level, I'm sure there's, like, some regional promotions that have boxing champions or, you know, but I'm not familiar with any in, like, the UFC or PFL or anything like that I'm aware of. So if anybody knows of any, let me know. But I can't think of another boxing champion, let alone Hall of Fame, you know, boxer that has competed in the UFC and won titles. You know, I don't think people realize how impactful Holly Holm's career is on women's MMA and MMA in general. You know, she had a very impressive professional boxing career, 38 professional boxing fights, and then to cross over to MMA and have as successful of a career as she's had is insane. It's insane. And she's going up against, to me, these are two of the greatest female combat sports athletes to ever do it. Two of the absolute best female combat sports athletes are about to compete at UFC 300. And I get it. Holly Holm, she's not necessarily in her prime anymore, but that doesn't make her any less dangerous, in my opinion, especially in this matchup with Kayla being more of a grappler. I do think that is going to give Kayla a huge advantage. But here's the thing. This is not the first judo black belt that Holly has faced. Remember when she humbled Ronda Rousey. Remember this, guys. So there's something to that, I think. You know, there's always that possibility that Holly could land that perfect head kick on Kayla Harrison and get a huge upset. So I think that people are really sleeping on this fight. Of course, it could be a boring fight. Any fight could be a boring fight. Look at Adesanya versus Romero. It's one of the worst fights I've ever seen. Like, people forget. There's bad fights in men's MMA. There's just more fights in men's MMA. So you don't remember, there's less data in women's MMA to go off of. So if there's one bad women's fight, people are like, oh, women's fight sucks. I'm sorry, some of the best fights I've ever seen have been women's MMA. Zhang Weili versus Joanna. Arguably saved that pay-per-view. Saved it. That was on the Romero versus Izzy card. Saved the pay-per-view. If that fight wouldn't have been that good, people would have been so mad. Because the main event was trash. And look at a majority of Amanda Nunes fights have been incredible. So, I mean, we've got another great women's fight on UFC 300. Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? If you aren't excited about that fight, you're a casual. And I'm sorry. And I don't mean casual as an insult. I just mean it. I mean, when I say casual, I don't mean it as an insult. I mean casual as in you aren't paying attention to the sport like I am. Like we are. Like hardcore fans. You're not a hardcore fan. Because if you've been paying any bit of attention to women's MMA, if you've been paying any bit of attention to women's MMA, you are excited about Marina Rodriguez versus Jessica Andrade. Marina Rodriguez has incredible Muay Thai. I mean, this fight is going to be a banger. Like, guaranteed. Guaranteed. Jessica Andrade, never seen a boring Jessica Andrade fight. She always brings it every single time. I am so excited for this fight, honestly. I can't believe people are complaining. Like, I've seen, I don't remember who it even was. Somebody was complaining that they added more women's fights to UFC 300. I'm sorry. We have two of the absolute best combat sports athletes in women's combat sports, and we have two of the most exciting female fighters on this card, Jessica Andrade and Marina Rodriguez. What is the problem? And then we've got Zhang Weili in a title fight, the first ever Chinese champion versus the Chinese challenger. Two Chinese fighters in a title fight for the first time in women's MMA, and you're complaining? Zhang Weili, her last fight, her striking accuracy was like 87 or 89% or something crazy. Zhang Weili is a monster. I don't get it. You could argue that the women's fights on UFC 300 could potentially be better than the men's fights. I don't get it. And I'm not going on a blue hair feminazi rant here. Okay, so let's not even get into that. That's not what this is about. Okay, you can like women's MMA without being a freaking feminist. Okay? Like I think that people, they don't watch women's MMA. But then they will say the fights are boring. How can you say the fights are boring when you don't watch them? You don't watch them. So what are you basing it off of? Like, people will literally say they don't watch women's fights, but then they'll say the women's fights are all boring. Okay, well, you told me you don't watch them. So how do you know they're boring? Oh, you don't, because you don't watch them. You don't watch the fights, so you don't know what they're like. Yeah, women's MMA has hit a point where we're getting to the point where it's pretty much just as exciting to watch as men's MMA. There's just less fights. There's less fighters on the roster. There's only 3 weight classes now. We got strawweight, flyweight, and bantamweight now in the UFC. So not a ton of fights in the 135 division is like barely a division. There's more fighters at men's flyweight than there are at women's bantamweight. So barely a division. But women's strawweight? Are you kidding me? Women's flyweight, we've got Erin Blanchfield, Macy Barber, Manon Ferriot, Rose Namajunas moving up to flyweight, fighting Amanda Hebas. I don't know. I kind of just think that some people don't like women. Just say that. Just say that. You don't like women. Cool. It's like the people in my comments that automatically assume I don't know anything because I'm a woman. And it's funny, and I laugh because I've talked to people who are at a very high level in this sport who have told me, you know, my level of knowledge is up there. And so I know. And these people aren't just saying that to be nice, you know, because they don't have to be nice. So, yeah. I think we need to be a little nicer to women in MMA. And I'm not. Look. If you guys want to keep telling me to get back in the kitchen, by all means, go for it. Oh, get back in the kitchen. Make me a sandwich. First of all, I'm in the kitchen all the time. I cook 3 meals a day. I cook all of my food. I'm always in the kitchen. So when you tell me to get back in the kitchen, I'm probably already there. Anyways, I just want to say that women's MMA is just as exciting as men's MMA if you pay attention to it the same way you pay attention to men's. You have to pay attention, though. You have to appreciate the female fighters. You have to, you know, follow it. If you don't follow it, of course you're not going to be excited about it because you don't know what's going on. You don't realize that Marine Rodriguez put one of the worst beatdowns I've ever seen on the Karate Hottie. Did you guys miss that? Hello? Yeah, just okay. All right, I'm done. I'm done. I am curious about the weight cut with Kayla Harrison. Apparently she has done test cuts, so she knows she can make the weight, but she did say something about she doesn't believe in cutting weight, which I don't follow. I don't follow that. I mean, I get what she's saying, but it's like, well, you're about to do it, so you better believe in it now. You better believe in it, girl. But apparently she's done a test weight cut, and she did it successfully. She knows what she's doing, supposedly, so I expect her to make weight. I mean, she's a professional. She's been a professional athlete for a long time. It is also very interesting. She is most likely the first fighter to enter the UFC who has only competed in the PFL in their MMA career. She's only competed in the PFL. So she didn't compete on, a regional show or an LFA or anything like that. She went straight to PFL and then now to UFC, which I think is very interesting because before it was like, oh, people are going from the UFC to PFL. And I don't think that is going to be the case. I think that a lot of these fighters in PFL are going to end up going to the UFC at some point. So, not a ton of them, but I think some of them are. And I think that, and I've thought about this a lot, because I do like PFL, actually. I mean, I covered the entire season, if you guys didn't pay attention to that. I covered the entire PFL season. I'm a big fan. I do like watching it. I do appreciate what they're doing. But at the end of the day, the UFC is the best platform if you're a fighter. I mean, that's where you want to be. That is the pinnacle. That is the top of the heap. So, while I do think there are a lot of talented fighters in PFL, and there's probably a lot of fighters in PFL that would do very well in the UFC. Hanan Fajeda is one that comes to mind. Sabadu C, when he was, maybe a little bit younger, I think would have been fantastic. If he would have spent more of his career in the UFC. And there's a lot of fighters that are in PFL that were in the UFC. A good percentage of them, but I think, some of them might go back to the UFC. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how everything kind of goes. I mean, look at Impa Kasanganay. He's had a lot of success in PFL. And yeah, I mean, also, I think it depends on where these fighters are at in their career. If they are able to make more money in PFL, then I think it could make sense for them, especially if they need the money. If they don't necessarily need the money, I think it's probably better to stay in the UFC. But if a fighter needs the money, then that solves a huge problem for them because that money may give them time. Because a lot of these fighters, when they're in the UFC, they have to work a second job. They have to maybe work a full-time job just to be able to support themselves. And they're fighting on top of it, which is very difficult to do, especially at that high of a level. To compete in, you're working full-time, it's hard to balance that. So I think you have an advantage if you don't have to work a job. You automatically have an advantage because you have so much more time that you can spend on training and you can get better sleep, you recover better. There's so many advantages to it. So I think that is an underrated factor. And I think that's why you see fighters like Impa do really well in PFL because, he's finally able to support himself through fighting. Whereas he was, not in a very good situation financially when he was in the UFC. So I think that's a big part of it too. So it depends on the fighter's situation. Oh my God, my nose. Itchy nose. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. But we'll see. I think that the UFC is still the top of the heap. I think that is the most desirable promotion to be in if you are a fighter. Unless your number one priority is income, of course. Then, maybe not. But that's why I think that fighters that come from maybe start in PFL and then go to the UFC, that might be a great path to go because you can make good money in PFL, face slightly less, tough competition, still make good money though, and then, build your resume, build your career, and then go to the UFC, get a better contract when you go to the UFC. Because if Kayla would have gone straight to the UFC instead of PFL, I don't think she would have gotten as good of a contract as she is getting now. I don't know. I doubt it. But I think that's the key. I think crossing over from another sport like Alex Pereira, perfect example. Israel Adesanya. You know, like these fighters that cross over from another sport, I think put themselves in a better position when they go to the UFC. But I still think the UFC is like, I think it's going to be for a while. You know, it's going to be the top of the heap for a while still. But I have heard about some changes, possible changes, not only just in UFC, but in MMA. So one rumor that was going around, and I don't know if this is still, people are still talking about this, but they were talking about supposedly putting Conor versus Chandler in UFC 300, which I think there's like a 10% chance that happens. At this point, I think that's very unlikely, just considering how things have gone with that whole situation. But there was also talks of weight class changes, getting rid of the 170 division, getting a 165 division, which to me sounds absolutely insane. I think that sounds absolutely insane. Because the fighters, if you look at the roster right now, the fighters that are at 170 and they're competing at the highest level, I don't know that 165 is realistic for them. I mean, look at how much weight Kamaru Usman was cutting at 170. So, I don't know if they're going to, go down to 165 or if they're going to move up to 185. And then do you have a weight class in between? Do you have a 175? Because to me, that doesn't make very much sense. You know, going from 155 to 165 to 185 seems a little crazy to me. I don't know. I'm not sure. I just don't know if I like that. I don't know that really solves any problems. Yeah, I don't know. So I doubt that's actually going to happen. I don't know. I just don't think it's going to. But who knows? I also saw a picture of David Feldman, the president of BKFC, with Dana White. And the caption, I believe, was something along the lines of big meeting or something like that. So I'm wondering what that's about. I'm very curious if it has anything to do with Mike Perry coming back to the UFC. And the thing is that Dana has been so against doing cross promotions. It makes me wonder if there's some kind of acquisition of some sort or some kind of deal to allow either my or they could just be meeting for some random reason, and it could be nothing. But I doubt it's nothing. I doubt they would take a picture and post it if it was nothing. But it makes me wonder, okay, what about Mike Perry coming back to the UFC? He's obviously a way bigger star now than he was when he was there. And what about Conor going to BKFC? You know, he was at the Mike Perry fight or whatever and, made himself present there. So that's always like kind of a possibility. I always could picture Conor doing bare knuckle boxing. I think that would be really cool, actually. But I think more likely it probably has to do with Mike Perry, I would think, which is very interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I still think that there's probably a big fight that's about to be announced within the near future that is probably going to shock me and everyone else. I don't know what it is, but I just have a feeling it's going to be something big. And I don't know if it has anything to do with bare knuckle boxing, but could be. Could be Mike Perry. Could be his return. I don't know. Imagine like Mike Perry versus Jorge Masvidal. Something like that. That would be crazy. So we'll see. We'll see what that meeting was all about. I'm really curious now. Really curious. But another change in MMA is a rule change that they're proposing, or I think that they've already decided they're going to do, is changing the grounded opponent rule. So this is a rule that I didn't really quite understand fully before. I mean, I knew if somebody like Aljamain Sterling, when he got kneed in the face by Petr Yan, obviously he was a grounded opponent. I think everybody clearly saw that. But if you just have your hand on the ground, that is technically not a grounded opponent. I thought that was already kind of the rule, but kind of not. Because when I was in a fighter meeting at a local show, the ref clearly instructed the fighters, like, okay, if your opponent is on the ground, like, you know, knee on the ground, whatever, you're a grounded opponent. But they basically were saying if you touch your hand to the ground purposely to be a grounded opponent, if you do that purposely, like, we know you're doing that purposely, we're not going to count that as grounded. That was basically the message the ref sent to the fighters. You know, it was like, okay, that's not grounded. Which was kind of what happened in the Evloev fight with Arnold Allen. You know, Evloev was touching his hand on the ground, but his hand wasn't like planted on the ground. He was touching the ground. So, it makes me wonder how that's going to work. Or how that's been working. Like, I guess this whole time, if you had your hand on the ground, you were technically a grounded opponent. So, but there's a lot of gray area there. So I think it's a good change to the rule. I agree. I think that it just gets rid of the confusion, you know. It gets rid of the confusion, it gets rid of the gray area. So you can't be a grounded opponent just with your hand on the ground. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair rule to have. And then another proposed change is the 12-6 elbows. So this was what disqualified John Jones in, you know, his only loss or whatever. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I don't know the data on that. I don't know, like, what does that elbow do to the health and safety of the fighter? Is it any worse than taking a punch? I mean, I'm assuming it would be a little bit worse. But, I don't know. I would think that maybe if a fighter is using that technique, that the ref just needs to be very careful to watch and not allow it to continue on and on and on. That would probably be wise. But I don't know how I feel about that rule. I don't know how I feel about that changing. I'm not necessarily mad about it because I'm not convinced really that a normal elbow that's legal now is really that much better. Or even just like taking a knee to the face, like a flying knee, or, you know, a knee in the clinch. I mean, I watched Anderson Silva throw knees and I'm like, yeah, that's way worse than a 12-6 elbow, in my opinion. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I think about that. I would like to see some data. Maybe I should kind of do some research on it, but yeah, I don't know if I'm not gonna like do a whole campaign against it. I don't think I'm really that passionate about it one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the things that they are going to change. So we'll see. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. I just wanted to kind of talk about the Sean Strickland thing and women's MMA. Got that rant out of the way. And then, another thing I want to talk about. Volkanovski versus Topuria. What? I feel like people are either very much saying Topuria is going to win or very much saying Volkanovski is going to win. There's not a lot of in between on this fight. And as much as I love Volkanovski, I do think some people are really underestimating Topuria. I mean, look what he did to Josh Emmett. And look what Josh Emmett didn't do to him. You know, like, look at Josh Emmett's performance against Bryce Mitchell. That was one of the worst knockouts I've ever seen. Topuria came out fine in that fight. You know, and with Volkanovski coming off that knockout loss, it's not very often that we see a fighter coming off of a loss, a knockout like that, and going into a title fight. And the only reason it's happening is because that happened in a different division. So it's very interesting. We don't see this often. We don't see this very often. And I think that a fresh Volkanovski handles Topuria 9 out of 10 times. But a Volkanovski coming off of a knockout loss to Islam Makhachev, I'm very wary of this because Topuria is on a tear. You know, he's undefeated. Yeah, he's got a lot of power. I don't know. I think that resume-wise, he's not there yet. Topuria is not there yet resume-wise, but I think skill-wise he is. I think he's there skill-wise. I think that he's coming into this title fight earlier than he probably should be. But the thing is, there's nobody else in the division that really deserves it. So, of course, you know, you're going to put him in there. But I do think the skills are there. I just don't think the experience in the resume is there. So that is the advantage that Volkanovski has. He has a lot of experience on Topuria. But Topuria has never lost. He's never been knocked out, obviously. So I do think that, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I'm going to watch some more film on Topuria. I've watched all of his UFC fights, obviously, but I might go back and watch some old stuff. And I'm going to rewatch some Volkanovski fights and see if there's anything I notice, anything I see that makes me have an easier time picking this fight. Because right now I can't pick it. I really can't. I don't know. But I am worried about Volkanovski. I am worried about him. So we'll see. But anyways, that's all I got. So thank you guys for tuning in. I will be back with a recap episode next week of the Imavov versus Delice fight. And then probably in the next couple weeks, we'll do a UFC 298 deep dive, which is the fight I was just talking about, Volkanovski versus Topuria. So I'll do a deep dive on that card. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. These next few pay-per-views are looking very stacked. So I'm excited. But thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for watching, listening, however you consume this. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.